we're being propagandized to death from day one, from the time we're born to school and how we're taught about history and what the government is and what it does. And wherever there's a problem, it's always like, oh, there's this problem in society. And well, how can the government fix it? It's never about like, what can individuals do or what can you do in your own life or anything like that? It's always, how can the government fix this? If the government really actually worked, if it worked for people, and if the things that we learn in school were actually true, that there are servants and they're doing these things for us, then why would we need all the propaganda? What we've done with governments and, sort of collectivizing people and thinking of everything in groups instead of individuals is not the natural way, even though that's kind of the world order right now. It's just that this is the phase that we're in. And, I think it's taken away a lot of opportunities for people in the world to grow because they just don't really know any better. The authoritarians only have so much power. There's always ways around this stuff, and there's always ways to create more freedom. The more freedom that we can have, the more self-actualized we'll be, and then it just creates a better world.
Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. In this episode, I spoke with Kevin Koskella, who is a digital nomad, globetrotter, and all-around freedom maximalist. I first got connected to Kevin on Twitter. He's a supporter of the show, and he invited me to come on his podcast, the Lovin podcast, which I'll give a link to that episode in the description. And I also invited Kevin to come on the Staying Free podcast to share some of his ideas as well. Turns out that Kevin and I have a very similar philosophy when it comes to freedom, so I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to connect and get to know each other a bit more through these conversations. Kevin has a book called The Rebel's Guide to Freedom, which is all about becoming resilient, owning your life, and thriving. And what I really like about Kevin is that he marries these ideas of freedom on a kind of macro scale, as well as freedom on a personal level, and in particular how the freedom philosophy applied to the individual can actually lead to self-growth as well. If you enjoyed the episode, please give it a like and a share on social media. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please give it a 5-star rating in whichever podcast app you're using. If you're new here, welcome. Give the podcast a subscribe for future episodes, and also go have a listen to some of the previous episodes, which I'm sure will also interest you. If you'd like to support the podcast, this can be done in 2 ways. You can give Bitcoin tips both on-chain and via the Lightning Network, and you can donate with fiat via Buy Me a Coffee as well. Links to those are in the description. Tips are hugely appreciated and will go directly towards the costs of running the show. All right, on to the episode.
I came down here and during COVID, I was planning on traveling the summer of 2020, and then everything hit and everything closed down. And I was even in June, I think it was June, I was like, well, Portugal was supposed to open up in July, and then that came and went. And then I was like, shit, I don't know where I'm going to go, because I usually travel, like go somewhere in the summer. And so then I ended up just kind of traveling in the US a little bit, and then Brazil was open the whole time. So I just, that was an easy choice because my business partner is here. So I was like, I'm going to Brazil. And then I've been going back like ever since then. I've just been back a bunch of times. And the first 3 times I went, it was so nice because nobody was traveling. Everybody was terrified of COVID, and I was going to empty airports and stuff like that. So.
All right, so you're going to go traveling anyway. You're not a COVID refugee or anything like that. You're always going to go abroad, but you just happened to end up in Brazil.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I had moved to Austin in January of 2020, and the plan was 6 months and then start traveling again. 'Cause I was pretty nomadic before that, and then 6 months, and it was like, yeah, there's no way I'm not going to Europe. It was completely closed. And so, yeah, Brazil was kind of by default. It was either Brazil or Mexico. And I just, I had reasons to be in Brazil. So, and I'd never been here before. So that was kind of a new adventure for me as well. So.
All right, cool. So you said that Brazil didn't have any restrictions and stuff. Was that always the case? Because I've heard kind of mixed things about this. Like you didn't have to at any point like get a vaccine to enter or anything like that.
Yeah. So no, when I first went in November 2020, it was completely open. They didn't require anything. It was just a passport. And so that was one of the reasons too. I was like, this is, it's wide open and super easy to get in. And then, things started to change in 2021. So it started with just doing the COVID test, right? And that was there for most of 2021. I think it was just the COVID test. And then in December, at the end of 2021, So Brazil is run by what they call activist judges. So it's a really bizarre thing because everybody focuses on the president, but the president doesn't have that much power. I mean, compared to their Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was anti-Bolsonaro. So they just wanted to. Bolsonaro came out one day and said, I do not want to require vaccines for people entering Brazil. So it was like the next week, the Supreme Court just went completely against him. And they said, that's it. We're going to require vaccines for everybody that enters, any foreigners coming into Brazil. So yeah, that was a little bit of a hit, but yeah, I mean, there's always way, where there's a will, there's a way. So, I'm not interested in accepting the vaccine into my life, but there's always ways to do things, especially with a big bureaucracy like Brazil, where it's pretty messy and you can't take it too seriously.
All right. So are you planning on just staying in Brazil then? Have you kind of set in roots, or are you still kind of in travel mode?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm here for the time being. I still have sort of like an address in Austin, and my business is based in Austin. So I'm not getting rid of that. I'm not going to change that. But I am. I'm dating somebody here in Brazil, so I'm trying to figure out how to stay longer. I haven't like looked into visas and all that. So this time around, I'm here for 2 months, and then I'll come back in January for longer. And I don't know how much longer. It might be the whole year. It might be a few months. It's really tough to say. Yeah, I'm sort of back in nomad mode, but it's sort of like between here in Brazil and Florianopolis and Austin.
Oh, cool. So yeah, just rewinding the clock a bit then. You said that you moved to Austin when you were in the United States. Like that's not where you're from. How did that go? Or I guess let's go back even further, like growing up and stuff. What was your philosophy then? Because obviously now you're into, all of this kind of freedom lifestyle and, digital nomadism and traveling and all this kind of stuff. So what was life like growing up?
Yeah, so I grew up in California, and I was outside of San Francisco, and I started discovering that I liked freedom at an early age when I had a globe in my room, and I would look at all the different countries and all the different places that I could potentially go to, and I would get in trouble a lot. So I would be sent to my room, right? And so I'd be sitting in my room, and I had a map on the wall and a globe, and I would just like look at like where else could I be right now? It'd be so much nicer if I were able to go off into some island somewhere or anywhere. I would pick some weird place in Russia or something and go, oh, that would be interesting. And so I started getting interested in travel at an early age. And then I also my parents were very political, and I just kind of followed along with what they thought. I just whatever they thought was right was what I thought was right, and I didn't question a whole lot. And then I got a little bit older, and I kind of started discovering like political philosophy, and I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem exactly right. And so my parents were kind of like right wingers. They were like fans of Ronald Reagan. That was where they came from. And and I think when I look back on it, it's like Reagan gave some great speeches. I mean, for sure, but nothing in government really changed when he took over. And so a lot of that was I sort of discovered later in my 20s and even my 30s, where I was like, this isn't exactly what I believe in. And I started kind of diving into, first it was like Harry Brown and like the How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. And then later was Ron Paul. And it sort of just opened me up to new ways of thinking about things. And then that led to getting really interested in psychology and sort of understanding myself. And I think that's where like really my life changed a lot, when I was able to sort of dig in and kind of figure out who I was, which I hadn't done. And then life kind of continuously got better and better after that. And I felt like I was much more able to make decisions that were beneficial to myself, instead of just sort of like being led around by whatever the thing is or whatever I'm supposed to do. Then it sort of allowed me to break out and carve out my own freedom, rather than wait for others to hand it over to me.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point as well. Like I feel that when you kind of invite freedom into your life, and not just necessarily like invite it into your life, but you actually learn about it. You learn about the philosophy of it, and you kind of incorporate it in some way into your life, and you try to live according to those values. Life seems to become more colorful. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that to get there, you really have to do a lot of digging in and understanding yourself and your capabilities in life. And if you don't do that, if you don't know who you are, it's going to be a lot of just being programmed by everybody around you, including, of course, media and government and schools and your friends that don't really have the same ambitions that you might have. And so, yeah, when you can get there and sort of embrace freedom, it does feel like it's so much better. And then all these like fights and frustrations and things like that are minimized because you can have a little more control over your own life rather than outsourcing it to others like politicians or something where you have to wait for things to happen in order to get life satisfaction.
Yeah, a big part of it is like personal empowerment, right? Like it's like when you stop depending upon these institutions, which to some degree are dependable, right? Like they might be dependable for a time. There might be a time that it's like, okay, I can trust the government to provide me with this, that, or the other. But, first of all, that clock is kind of always ticking. You never know it's always going to be there. But also when you kind of like step away from that personal empowerment kind of can be just really a really fulfilling process to go through, right? I think that that's a natural part of the human experience that a lot of people just kind of deny.
Yeah, that for sure. Yeah, that's it's a really tough thing for a lot of people, especially depending on where you're born, because sometimes it's like you could be born in a certain place where these values of collectivism are just drilled into your head, like this is how things are, and it's really hard to break free from those program beliefs. And so yeah, I agree. I mean, that's it becomes like you really open up your life to a lot more opportunities if you can sort of see that like freedom is yours for the taking, and it's not going to be an easy path. It's not the path of least resistance. And but yeah, there's all sorts of paths. There's also all sorts of ways to get there. It's not just one way. There's not a prescribed thing. It's not like you get a degree and then you do this. It's so many things.
Yeah. So a lot of people, they would kind of take the other side of that and they go, oh, like collectivism is like a great thing. And the way that I'm going to solve problems in my life is not going to be by taking kind of self-ownership. I'm going to look for political solutions to this stuff, right? Like I'm going to find every societal problem, I'm going to find a political solution for it. And that's the answer. We should always just try to, find that solution that way. And you just advocate for that. Why is it that you take a different approach?
Well, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So that's one of the main things. And yeah, it's interesting because if the government really actually worked, if it worked for people, and if the things that we learn in school were actually true, that there are servants and they're doing these things for us, then why would we need all the propaganda? Like, we're being propagandized to death from day one, from the time we're born to school and how we're taught about history and what the government is and what it does. And especially in the US, I don't know how much you growing up in the UK, you got of this kind of propaganda. But for us, a lot of it was like, we're always the good guys. The government is noble, and it's the way America was created was this like almost religious thing that happened with these people that were like all knowing and it's like that we had we were taught that these founding fathers were like pretty much gods. Like there was nothing better, and you couldn't possibly come up with a better idea than what they had. And here's all the reasons why it's so great. And then, you just go through life and anywhere you go, there's TVs on with whatever news channel, CNN or whatever. And that's reinforcing everything. And then, like you said, it's like that wherever there's a problem, people look for the government to fix it. And that's the go-to thing. If you pay attention to news, it's always like, oh, there's this problem in society. And well, how can the government fix it? It's never about like, what can individuals do or what can you do in your own life or anything like that? It's always, how can the government fix this? And if you're either on one side or the other, right? You can't have a different opinion. It has to be, well, you either want to do it this way or that way. And so usually it falls in line with the two parties. And then, everybody's arguing about these solutions that are not workable. They do not work. And there's, we could go into all the philosophy behind that, but it's pretty clear that it's done now. Now 2022, we're seeing the final stages of these institutions being credible and reliable, and anything that we can even believe anymore.
That's funny you say that, actually, about like the founding fathers and stuff, and the fact that was kind of so imbued in like American culture, is teaching you about the nature of that. Because I always wondered this, like, because I think that the founding fathers and the foundation of America and stuff, or the formation of America, like there's actually the ideology they adopted is actually something that's been very much like lost over time in some sense. And I wonder whether like there's almost a backlash in America to a certain degree about the founding fathers and about the founding of America, that's like, because now America's kind of is so divergent to that, like you look at look at like Joe Biden and everything that he advocates, and not just him, you could argue the same of the Republicans as well, but especially I think this is true of like the Democrats and Joe Biden in particular. The whole ideology is very much just like, the government will fix all your problems, and they don't like much of what the founding fathers actually stood for. So I always wondered, like, what do they teach in school? Because presumably you have to, recite, what is it? Is it like you recite the, there's some mantra, isn't there, in America that you recite in schools? I can't remember what it is, but it's all about like, the
Pledge of Allegiance.
That's the one. Yeah. Pledge of Allegiance. And I always wondered, like, will that go on forever, or will they try to like phase it out as they kind of try and walk away from those ideas?
Yeah, that's a good question. It has gone way far from the original ideals of the country. I mean, when the country started, there was no income tax for 100 years. There was no income tax, and it was booming. It was like America was the freedom, to the center of freedom in the world, to this day, this is why we are still going relatively strong in the U.S. because it's just momentum. I mean, the United States has the biggest government in the world. It's not even close, and it's like this idea of the founding fathers had of keep the government to a minimum. The night watchman state that will just kind of just be for the courts and police and things like that, but nothing else. And it's gone so far from that, and yet we still have the rhetoric. I mean, it's still there. They're still they will recite these things, in especially with politicians, and as if it's still the same place. But you traveled, I traveled. I mean, we know it's kind of just another country now, and it's there is that sort of underlying streak of liberty in the U.S. that I think other countries don't really have, but it's pretty buried these days. It's not. Like, it's definitely not showing up in government. I mean, that's for sure. And that's where, you talk about, your podcast is staying free. And, in order to stay free, we need to take it upon ourselves. I mean, there's no more going into this thing of like, oh, we'll just roll it back, right? That's what the Republicans will say. Well, we'll just roll it back, and we just need to get the right politicians in there, and then we'll be able to get back to what we were before, which was so great. But then you look back, and there were problems all along the way, especially after they put in the income tax and the Federal Reserve and all these things. So many problems. So it didn't really work. Like, this was a great try, a great experiment, but it didn't work.
Yeah, exactly. So actually that kind of brings me nicely on to the next thing I wanted to discuss with you, which is location independence. Because I think this is something that a lot of people maybe like neglect a bit, is like the ability to become free and become like more kind of self-sovereign by kind of, flag theory. Some people know it as, but I guess the more common term is like just literally moving to somewhere that offers you more freedom or more benefit, just more, even just more prosperity or something in your life, right? So you've obviously kind of somewhat gone through that process. You're living in Brazil now. Like, how do you kind of like view this whole concept of location independence and how it fits into like freedom philosophy?
Yeah, I think that it's part of the equation for me. It's not everything, because there's some people that just love where they live. They don't really want to travel. They don't necessarily, like, have the desire to live in another country or even another city. They just love where they are. So that's fine. And I think you can have just as much freedom if that's what you want. Because I don't ever prescribe it. Like, you need to be like able, location independent. I think, well, I'll take that back. I think becoming location independent is really important, but that doesn't mean you need to go and bounce around the world or live in different places. I think there's just the ability to be able to leave if you had to, if something were to go horribly wrong and you had to leave. I think that's where it becomes important. And then as far as like, I think it's a personality thing. Like you and I both like to travel and see different places and experience different places. And that's great. And if that's what you want, you can do it. And as you probably know, you don't need a lot of money. And so this is the thing is like when you realize this, you can have so much freedom to see so many places in the world. And for me, that's awesome. It's amazing to be able to go and live somewhere else, or even just to travel, for a month somewhere and have my laptop and, be able to still make enough money to get by. And so I think that it is part of this whole equation of building more freedom.
Yeah. So I guess we obviously kind of have that ability, we're kind of digital nomads and we have the ability to move to different places. But there are some, there are a lot, well, most people, I guess, that aren't able to do that. They're not necessarily able to be digital nomads and that kind of thing. Do you think that everyone needs to have essentially like a different approach to this? Someone might say, okay, well, my job is I work in this particular place. I need to be in the factory or whatever, like working there. That for those people, like they need to just kind of approach freedom differently? Or do you think that everyone should be in some way ascribing to have some level of location independence? Because I guess I look at this a lot from like from my own lens. Like I'm looking at the world through the lens of someone, I work, essentially with like technology and media. It can be done anywhere. And I kind of have that luxury. And sometimes I'm like, I talk about these things, but it's kind of from a very like privileged perspective of my own personal kind of career circumstances. And even a lot of my friends are in kind of like somewhat similar situations to me. They are actually able to do their jobs remotely. So I guess like for those people who aren't, how do those people kind of become free in their own lives? People who might not necessarily have location independence at their disposal.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what I was saying. Is it's more of like, what is your desire? Is your desire to go out and explore the world, or are you okay with living in just one place and maybe taking a vacation every now and then? I think that's what it comes down to. So it's like knowing yourself. What kind of life do you want? Do you want to stay in the same place, maybe raise a family and just kind of get embedded in the community? Or do you want to go out there and have, adventures in different parts of the world, different parts of even the country? I mean, you could spend a lifetime traveling around the US and never see the whole thing, and never experience everything in the US. So there's a lot that can be done just in your local area. So I think you can have a lot of freedom. And I don't think it's a bad thing if, and especially if you like your job. Like there's people that like their job and they want to stay in that job and they don't necessarily want to leave. And maybe it's a good salary or they just enjoy what they do and they enjoy the people they work with. And, I don't see any problem with that, but I think it's like setting yourself up for the case that you might not have a job. I mean, like obviously we're in a recession right now. Things happen really quickly with layoffs and things like that. So it's really good to be able to have backups to what you're doing. If you have a job and you're kind of stuck in one location, well, I mean, look what happened during COVID. I mean, we had California just kind of went down the tubes, and especially places like San Francisco, where I'm from, where it used to be just a really nice place to live, and then in the last couple of years, it just kind of tanked, and it's just become a shitty place to live. But still with the price tag, like you're not saving, the money, the rent didn't go down, but you're paying the prices as if it was this amazing city, which it used to be. And now it's just not there anymore. And to be able to say, okay, I just looked at, so here's a story. I was just looking at the house I grew up in as a child. It's a very moderate 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in a okay area, middle class kind of area, in a city that never was known for being very nice. It was it's in the East Bay, and it was always known for it's always kind of like there's crime, it's not, nothing really amazing about it. And that house is now it's valued at $1.1 million. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. That makes no sense to me. It's out. Everything is completely out of whack. And so what if you had the opportunity, if you were in a place like that, you could sell your house for $1 million and just get out and move somewhere that could be really nice and pocket the money and then go live in a much cheaper area. I mean, that's freedom right there, right?
Yes. The way that I kind of visualize this in my mind is like a lot of the Western countries, like the Western economies that we traditionally thought were, really, really like awesome and, provide such good quality life, etc. They're like an elevator going down now, like they kind of have already peaked. They've gone to the top that they're going to go. They're now kind of coming down because they've all become, these, they've turned into kind of very collectivist societies. Like the culture's changed. The, government has kind of grown out of proportion. They've got huge amounts of like debt at the national level. And now those elevators are coming down, but like there's all these other elevators of, like other countries, like other nations that have really good offerings that are on the way up. They're countries that are now increasing their wealth. They're now places where people are getting more educated, where, career opportunities are better in those countries, where they're opening up, they're becoming more liberalized kind of economies, right? So like they're going up and you can kind of step off the elevator going down while another one is going up. And then you can kind of like continue to improve your lifestyle. And I think a lot of people, maybe kind of like they're willing to like ride the elevator right down to the bottom, and perhaps they think that there's going to be some kind of sea change, and it could happen, right? Like these things could happen. There could be some event, like let's say an economic catastrophe that, looks like we're already at the beginning of, and they could say, oh, well, America is going to be the last one to totally collapse or whatever. But I look at those societies and, you can see with some cities like in America and in Canada and in the UK and other European cities where actually the cities, they're really bad, like they've got huge amounts of homelessness and stuff. I mean, you'd see on an average day in the UK, for instance, like you're walking around London, you walk down like your average street, you're going to see more homeless people than I've probably seen in like Mexico, like the entire time I've been here.
Wow.
It's like, there's very little homelessness here. And, it's the case for a lot of other countries. I think that there's poverty. Don't get me wrong. There is poverty, but like this kind of abject poverty, where we're like tents on the side of the street and stuff that you see in California and, you see it in London and stuff as well now. Like I've never seen that here. I don't know if you have it in Brazil, but it seems like this phenomenon is kind of like uniquely Western,
Yeah.
And I think that kind of just speaks to the fact that because we become so collectivized, we're so used to the government doing everything for us and just saying, okay, well, if something goes wrong, the government will be there. Well, when it's not, you're in a tent in the street in the West, right? But whereas if you're in Mexico, you go and live with your parents, you go and live with your family, you go and, there's someone there who's going to take you in because they haven't developed these collectivist societies in the first place. I don't know if that's an observation you would agree with or not.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think most people, or the vast majority of people, have homelessness completely wrong. But I don't have the answer either. It's such a difficult thing. And I lived in San Diego for a long time, and downtown San Diego is just filled with homeless people. I mean, there are streets that are lined with tents, like you were saying. It's like, and I mean, it was a huge problem in San Diego. And there were rumors that I believed that were true, or that there were other cities that would send homeless people to San Diego. So they would put them on a bus and send them out when the election was coming up. And then they go, hey, look, we solved homelessness, or we're making progress on homelessness in this city. And that is totally believable to me, because that's something that politicians would do. And but what they do, like in San Diego, the way they try to solve it is to build shelter for homeless, like take the taxpayer money and build shelters. And people think, well, that's a good thing because they're homeless, they need homes. But the problem is a lot of them, they actually want to be homeless. It's like, that's been, if you go around and ask them, they don't really have a huge desire to not be homeless. Some of them do. I mean, that's true. But it's a combination of a lot of things. I mean, some of it is drugs. Some of it is people getting strung out on drugs. Some of it is the military adventures that the United States military goes on and sends these kids off to battle, and then they end up killing somebody. Their friends get killed, whatever happens, and then they get traumatized, and they come back to the U.S. and they get some benefits for like the first year, but after that, they're kind of just let go. And then if they have mental issues, they're not dealt with. So then they end up on the street. So there's all these factors that go into it. And then the cities are left to deal with the problem. And what they do, all they do is throw money at it. And then they're not even incentivized to fix the problem, because these city, whatever government people, they're just trying to keep their jobs. So in order to keep their jobs, if they actually solved homelessness, they're not as relevant. So they kind of need homelessness to continue. Now, I think that there are people that work at these cities they're good people. They want to do the right thing, but I don't think that the incentives are there. So the problem continues to get worse because we're, like you said, the collectivism, we're expecting that, oh, well, the government will solve it. Like nobody's innovating to come up with ways to solve it and to change, the fundamentals. Like, why do we have such a big drug problem in the US? And why are we still sending, going off to wars that make no sense? I mean, these are things that need to be questioned. And, so, I mean, it's a complex issue, and I don't know what the answer is, but I know that right now nobody's really tackling it.
Yeah. And I mean, you do have, because the thing is, I talk to like Mexican people here and I'll say, oh, I left the UK to come here and stuff. Sometimes they can't believe it. They're like, oh, but all the Mexican people, they want to be in America. People want to go to America and work. And it's a funny dynamic because it does actually make economic sense for people from Mexico, even now, even with the decline of America, because Mexico's kind of on the rise as a country.
Yeah,
America's on a decline, but right now there's still a gap. There's still a kind of arbitrage opportunity, if you know what I mean. So people in Mexico, it does still make sense, especially for low earning people in Mexico, to go to USA and earn the money, right? But it also makes sense for people in America who have some degree of money to come to Mexico to have a better quality of life, because they're paying more for less, right? Whereas what Mexicans want is they want to earn more so that they can actually just have that basic level of, kind of living standard, essentially. So it's a weird time that we're in right now when I think that this switch is happening between Western countries and non-Western countries in terms of like prosperity and economic opportunities, etc. But I genuinely think that there is going to become a tipping point. And, kind of a side note, but just it's something I've been thinking about lately, is everything that's going on, for instance, in Europe at the moment with the energy prices. Like, some people's energy bills, they've gone up by like 1,000%. I think like they've gone up like at least 3x maybe. Yeah. But there are actually some people, it's gone up even more than that. It's gone up so much in the UK. I'm kind of waiting for a tipping point where people say, well, I literally can't heat my home. I'm going to have to go somewhere that has cheaper energy. Generally, the places that got the cheapest energy, they're kind of like quote unquote third world countries. They're not like the big Western nations. It's, it's kind of like Southeast Asia, and it's, it's South America, etc. So yeah, I wonder if you can speak to that for a minute.
Yeah, it's very similar in Brazil from what you described. Is that, like, I tell people, I'm from the U.S. and they have this kind of like there's a strange thing here where there's this like awe of, oh, you're from the U.S. Like that's just like paradise, and they think it's this the vision is that it's this free market paradise that like that's where everybody wants to go. Of course, you'd want to go to the U.S. and I understand that because it is like Brazil has been in this phase of like it's kind of a third world place. There's a lot of things here that don't work. Things just generally don't work in Brazil, and so I get it. But they're not seeing it like we are. They're just not seeing that side of it where it's like, yeah, do you realize how much you're going to pay there and how much you're going to struggle and all that? It's a different world. But I'm actually curious to hear from you. Like, where else do you think are places that are kind of on the rise? Because this is something that I'm really I always geek out on. Is like even within the U.S. or within other countries, like where are places that are on the rise that are sort of like, they're closer to kind of the first world type of thing, where it's like. I don't see Brazil as a country on the rise. I mean, it had its time, like it in the early 2000s, the early aughts. It was kind of on the rise, and then they just opted for socialism, and then they went for a decade with socialism, and it completely just stagnated the economy. And then Bolsonaro took over, and he was kind of like the stopgap guy, where he's not like a free market, libertarian or anything, but he stopped some of the socialism from continuing to move forward. And then of course, just like any election, they demonized him for all the bad things that happened. And then now they're bringing in a socialist. So I don't think that this is some kind of like, place that's going to be in 5-10 years. It's going to be like a paradise or anything like that. So I'm curious to hear from you, like, in terms of Mexico or other places, like, what do you think is, to catch that, if you're on the elevator down, like, what's the next place, or what are some other places? Like Asia was interesting to me for a long time, but then when COVID hit, it was like, they just went crazy. I mean, almost every country in Asia just completely locked down. I was in Taiwan, and that was a really cool country. And then they're like, nobody gets in. All the citizens that were traveling had to come home, and they had to quarantine for 14 days and pay for it. And I mean, and then every other country, Thailand went nuts, and everywhere went nuts. And I'm like, God, I don't know if I'm into Asia anymore.
Yeah, in terms of like, where do I think is kind of up and coming? I mean, I guess the thing is, like, my opinion on this has kind of changed since COVID, because every single country, almost without exception, went full authoritarian. I now kind of discount authoritarianism really around the world generally as being a kind of minus on the, when I'm tallying it up as a kind of advantage or disadvantage, because I'm just like, well, everywhere went totalitarianism. Like, everywhere exposed themselves as fundamentally being totalitarian their essence. So I'm kind of at this point now where I'm like, for instance, I don't know if you've been to Vietnam when you were in Asia. Did you visit there?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, Vietnam would be very, very high on my list. Obviously they did go full kind of COVID totalitarian, but no more than Canada, no more than really any country. So I think the reason that I say somewhere like Vietnam, and I do have a few other examples, but Vietnam, and I've mentioned it a few times on the podcast, they are incredibly self-sovereign. The people there, they all, they own the property they're on, they own the land they're on, they grow their own food, etc. Like they are very, very self-sovereign people. And even though it's kind of on paper a communist country, I don't see any signs of it. There's not really many rules. Nobody kind of gives a crap as long as you're not doing anything to anyone else. Occasionally you have to bribe a police officer because they come around and, there's corruption there, of course, right? But, there's corruption everywhere. It's just that there it's on a community level. I always think this, like, third world has corruption on a community level. The first world has corruption on a systemic level, right? That's normally the difference, right? So I kind of, again, corruption, I kind of discount it. But I think that somewhere like Vietnam, it feels to me like the American dream is very much alive there. So many people, very entrepreneurial, have their own businesses, etc. Very, they're family orientated. They have kind of, good cultural values in that sense. They look after their family. So I think Vietnam is a good example. I think that recently, and especially since COVID, Africa has appealed to me a lot. I think that it looks like many countries in Africa, they just did not fall for the COVID scam whatsoever. They seem to kind of really, I don't just see reality. Maybe they just have a natural disposition towards kind of being, anti-authority or skeptical of authority, but they seem to kind of, carry on as normal. And they seem to be very entrepreneurial as well. I'm kind of hearing a lot about Africa in terms of what they're doing in the technology space, what they're doing in like the Bitcoin space. A lot of Bitcoin companies now are sprouting up over there. I think Africa looks really good. And, obviously Mexico, that's kind of one of the reasons I'm here. I think that Mexico has generally done really well with this. I like the fact that they're welcoming to foreigners, and especially, there's a lot of people from Canada, especially here, who are kind of like freedom seekers who have come to Mexico. Mexico's been very welcoming to them, made it very easy. They actually made it easier, I think, for Canadians specifically. I don't think I'm misspeaking here, but I think they made it easier for Canadians specifically to actually apply and get residency and stuff because there were so many coming in. I think that those would be the places I'm looking. Maybe Eastern Europe to a degree, but the problem with Eastern Europe, I think, is just everything going on with like Ukraine and Russia. I would be a bit concerned living in that region at the moment. But yeah, what do you think? What have you kind of come down as your key places?
I totally agree with you. The philosophy of, you have to build your own freedom, and to, one country having slightly more or less authoritarianism, it's not that interesting. And it's more about like, are you able to run a business? Are you able to, what's the visa situation? Is it going to be like, ridiculously hard to get a visa, or can you, like Brazil is an easy place to stay for a long time. So that's one of the reasons that I'm here. But yeah, like I like Vietnam too. I noticed the same thing there. There was this one, they sell a lot of street food in Vietnam. Yeah. It was, when I was there, I don't know if the laws have changed since, but I was there in 2013, and it was illegal to sell food on the streets. But did that stop anybody? Like, no, of course not, because they're Vietnamese. They're awesome. They're like, no, they just keep going. And they would have an informant that would tell them when the cops were coming. So if there were police coming, somebody would tell the the vendor, like, hey, and then they had this system where they would just fold up if they had a stove or something out, they would just fold it all up and they would put it underneath, and then they would just sit there, and you didn't even know anything was cooking. And then as soon as the police would leave, they'd come in, they'd check, and they'd look around, and then they would leave, and then all the food comes out, all the cooking comes, it's all back. And when I saw it happen, it was in the city called Dalat. It's up in the mountains. And I was watching the whole thing happen. And when the police, there was a police van that came up. And as soon as the van left, the crowd cheered. They're like, yay. And I was like, man, this is like a libertarian country. I mean,
yes,
just the way they operate,
yes.
even though, like you said, they're communist, in theory.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's the thing. They seem to have a healthy suspicion of authority, and they seem to just kind of want to get on and do their own things. And, maybe that's because of living under some, dictatorial regimes or something. But yeah, it's almost like you kind of have to have an awareness of that. The other country I might add to that list as well, by the way, is India, because I feel like India, and this is less on a kind of nationalistic level in terms of what they're doing, but I think that the people there individually, they seem to just have a spirit, like really, like they're such free-spirited people in India, just like they are not, I don't know, they seem to just live for life, just, it's hard to explain it. I don't know if you've visited there, but there's an atmosphere there, and it's just like, people are so free-spirited, and I really love that. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. I'd love to check it out. I think that you might have to put up with some things to be there for a bit, but yeah, I'm sure there's a potential. Even though we're talking about the authoritarianism, it angers me that their government is like they banned, I think it was their 100 bills. I think the government came and banned whatever.
I was
the
there
highest,
when that happened. Yeah.
Oh, you were?
I was there.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in India where they basically had this process called demonetization or something like that. And it's basically where they decide that the money is no longer currency almost overnight. And then you have to go and like trade it all in. And it was a very, very weird time. It was very disruptive because, we'd gone there like traveling, and we'd basically just, taken loads and loads of cash out because it's a cash economy over there. So we just took tons of cash, over there. And something like, I think it was about 10 days or something into the trip. I was in India for about a month, something like 10 days into that trip. It was like cash was completely, like all the cash that we got was just rendered worthless, like immediately.
Wow.
So yeah, you had to like queue up at these kind of government, like buildings. They were based, I think they were, I don't know if they were banks or they were actually just like government institution buildings, whatever. And you had to kind of like queue up with all of your money to go inside these buildings to then trade it. And you could only trade the equivalent of $40 per day, right? So you went in, you showed them my ID and stuff, and they would only let you do $40. The reason was because the whole point of it was to flush out all of this kind of like dark money, essentially people being paid in cash. People were just like hoarding money under their sofa or whatever, deliberately because they didn't want to pay taxes. So they were trying to flush out all of that money. So they were like, well, if everyone comes in and does $40 a day, then at the end of it, there's going to be people kind of holding the bag, so to speak, of all this currency, which is all dark money. And, they've all lost out and all of the other money has been kind of cleaned up. Now, But what inevitably happened is that the rich people, it was rich people, essentially, they were trying to catch out by this, property, people who were collecting rents and stuff all in cash. What they just did, though, is they just paid poor people a little bit of money to go to change their cash. They would give them $40 and then say, okay, we'll give you like an extra $5, go and queue up for an hour, right? Bring me back the 40 and you keep the 5, right? So it was fundamentally like flawed, the whole system, but it was very disruptive. And especially because, we were there as tourists and we were kind of like queuing up to go and do this stuff. And all that time meant that we weren't spending money in the real economy. So what ended up happening was we were joining these queues, and the locals were like bringing us to the front of the queue, right? And then you would have the security guards there kind of at the front of the queue, and they were like, no, go to the back of the queue. And the locals were all screaming at them and going, no, let them in, because they knew that we were going to go into these buildings, exchange the money, and we were going to go out and spend it. So they knew that it was important for the tourists to have the money to spend in the economy. Otherwise, nobody's making any money. So it was a very interesting time. And it was just peak, we were talking before about like, government and centralization and all this stuff. This was just peak, like, bad incentives. Like they just had not thought this through at all. They had this idea, we want to get more taxes, we want to flush out this kind of dark money, but it had all of these consequences that ended up
Right.
meaning not only did it kind of fail fundamentally in what it was trying to achieve, but it was actually counterproductive because the poorer people were losing out on, nobody being able to spend money because money became like really scarce. It was very strange, very strange.
Yeah, it's like they overplayed their hand. I mean, just like the COVID stuff, it's like that's the good thing about like, there's always, we talk about all these different places around the world. There's always ways around this stuff. And there's always ways to create more freedom wherever you are and to find, the workarounds and to find, and that's the beauty of seeing this in all different parts of the world is that like, you realize that, the authoritarians only have so much power. They're not going to be able to keep the charade going forever. And a lot of the things they do actually don't work, even though it seems like they have all the power and, they just continue on. But it's almost like some of these places like, India or Vietnam and even Mexico it's more fun to live there than somewhere like Switzerland, which everybody just trusts the government and everybody just goes along because the government has it all figured out. And there's not as much of that opportunity, but you can always find it. There's always ways to be more free in your life.
Yeah. So let's get back onto that topic then of like personal freedom. Why do you think personal freedom is important?
Well, I think we're born free, and it's our natural state. So I think when we have, whether it is parents or government or teachers or bosses, even kind of ordering us around, taking away our freedoms, our autonomy, it becomes unnatural. So it's a very difficult way to live. And I think the majority of people live this way. So, but when you can break free, and when I say break free, I mean everything, like psychologically, physically, even politically, if it's possible, then you start to live in a more natural state. To me, I see it as that what we've done with governments and sort of collectivizing people and thinking of everything in groups and instead of individuals is not the natural way, even though that's kind of the world order right now. It's just that this is the phase that we're in, and I think it's taken away a lot of opportunities for people in the world to grow because they just don't really know any better. So yeah, I think that's the main thing is it's important because it's natural.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was talking about this idea of like freedom on an individual level and like the kind of importance of that. And the guy put it in like a really, really like in a way that I think is just it's true, but you can also kind of like sense it, which is that how do I do it justice? I'm not going to be able to do justice to the original thing. By the way, the podcast was on. I can't even remember what the podcast was. I wish I could. I'll try and put it in the show notes if I remember what the podcast was. Anyway, it basically said like if for the human to actually be able to like become self-actualized, you need freedom, because if you have no freedom, if you have like no personal freedom, if everything is kind of like extracted out to some institution that defines within the parameters of which you can live your life, right? I guess like absolute non-freedom would be like you have no ability to do anything in your life. You can't even move without asking someone. You can't take a drink without asking someone. Whatever, like that's absolute non-freedom. You can never become self-actualized in that state because you have no like capacity to actually like explore your own the nature of your own being, your nature of your own like your own ethics, your own interactions with other people in the world. And then kind of like the opposite of that, I guess, is like complete freedom. You can do absolutely whatever you want, but kind of like within the realms of that, you create your own like your desires are your own desires, right? Like they're not desires that have been forced on you. Nobody's kind of telling you exactly how you can live. I think that the more freedom that you have, the more like potential for self-actualization you have. And that doesn't mean you should do anything, right? That because you might say, well, that I might have the freedom to kill someone and no one's going to stop me, right? But you still say, I'm not going to kill that person because I have formulated an ethical framework, which I understand implicitly, okay, it's wrong to kill or whatever. Well, that's part of self-actualization too, like even developing your own personal philosophy, right? Which you can only do through some level of kind of like trial and error and through some level of freedom, right? I might be kind of getting a little bit away from the point here, but I think like fundamentally, like you have to have like optionality in the world to then be able to like have freedom, to be able to be self-actualized, and you can't have kind of optionality without essentially being free. It's like to the largest degree practicable, essentially.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the idea of like that if there were no laws that people would just go around killing each other, I think it would actually there would be much less crime if there were no laws because of what you just said, like being able to self-actualize, people would understand themselves at a much earlier point in life. And there wouldn't be some desire to go and kill people. And there wouldn't be a desire to get a bunch of people together and go, invade some other area and say, oh, now we rule this, because there's no point to it. Like nobody's ruling over, nobody's dominating anyone else. So the fewer laws we have, the more peace we'll have, the more opportunities we'll have. And, things will just kind of flow much better. And I think I had one other thing that you said. I don't know. I'll probably think of it later. But but that's a good point about self-actualization. Is that's kind of the key to all this. Is that the more freedom that we can have, the more self-actualized we'll be, and then it just creates a better world.
Yeah, exactly. And it's an interesting point you raise about the like killing people and whether because I think that some people say, oh well, of course we have to have laws, otherwise everyone will kill each other. It's like, will they? Like there's many things that we just don't do. And we don't necessarily have a law like stopping us doing it, but we know implicitly not to do it, right? Like there are some things which we take upon our own ethics, and I think this is similar to the argument as well about I often use this example when people talk about like taxation, and they say, oh well, without taxation, how are the poor people gonna eat? How are the poor people gonna be housed and stuff? And I say, well, like, if you didn't have taxation, I wonder whether we would probably, my belief is we would probably have less poverty. But I would say, like, here's how I would kind of posit the question is like, is the fact that we are spending money on taxes actually separating us from the innate desire to actually help other people? I.e., we just say, oh, well, the government's doing it. I'm paying my taxes, so of course the poor are being fed. And of course the, the people in need of a home are being given shelter, right? But actually, like, they're clearly not, right? You can walk around to these cities and you can tell, well, it's not happening. But it's very easy to walk down the city streets, see all these homeless people and say, oh, well, I'm paying my taxes, I'm doing my part. Whereas if there was no taxes, maybe you would say, hey, you know what? Like, I need to do more for this. Like, maybe I need to help someone out here. Maybe I need to bring someone into my home. Maybe I need to, give them money or give them a job or whatever it might be, because it brings back to the individual, like, personal responsibility. It kind of brings it back into the realm of personal responsibility rather than abstracting it out for governments that, really don't have the incentives to deal with the problem anyway.
Right. It goes to innovation. I mean, if there wasn't taxation and a stranglehold on the economy, there'd be so much more innovation in every way. And we talked about homelessness earlier. What are the creative ways that we're trying to solve that problem? There aren't. They're just throwing money at it. Here, build this structure, build some houses for these people, and then it doesn't work, and then they just put more money into it. But if we had the ability to help people without having all this money taken away from us through taxes, then there would be so much more innovation, and things would flow a lot better. And the idea that there would be far fewer poor people, because first of all, the free market would create more opportunities for them. And then secondly, the charities that, even now, like in the US, there are so many great charities, even with taxation. But if you took all that money that you're taking from people and just let them keep it, then these charities would just become much better. And you would have all kinds of places for people to go. People talk about the safety net, and that would be like that to your point. I think it'd be much better if we didn't have the government in charge of the safety net, because I think there could be a safety net, but it would look so different than what it looks like now, where, there's so many ways that could be done. And we don't even know, like, because like you said, people just go, well, I pay my taxes, so, I'm doing my part. And if that went away, it's not like people would just go, oh, screw those homeless people. Like, people still care. There's enough compassionate people that there would be a lot of programs and things that would help with poor people. But then it comes down to like entrepreneurship. It's like, how does society move forward? How do we solve problems? It's through entrepreneurship, and that's by far the best way. Even Bono, the U2 singer, he even came out the other day and he said, I thought all these years that it was the government should have fixed all these problems, but now I realize it's entrepreneurs that could really make a difference.
Oh, I didn't hear that. That's awesome. That would be actually great if he's made that admission. But you're right. Like you can look at this throughout history, and you can see categorically the things that have generally improved the human condition. It's technology, basically. It's the invention of something new, something paradigm shifting, which normally, by the way, actually makes the individual more sovereign. Right? It's things like the bicycle. Right? The bicycle was just an amazing invention that just said, okay, well now people can kind of get around for essentially like very, very low cost, little to no cost. And now someone can go long distances and they can actually improve their lives that way. And normally those are the technologies that do it. Like some technology comes around that makes the individual more self-sovereign, that kind of like allows them to do something in their own life, provide for themselves in some way or the people around them. And that improves things, right? And I would even take this a step further, because we were talking about like some of these like developing nations or something that actually, have kind of, people are more self-sovereign, like Vietnam, etc. And the fact that they haven't really developed like a welfare state, not just there, but in a lot of other countries, it actually means that the societal kind of the societal paradigm never really arrives that you actually end up needing it, because you go to these places and it's like, because there is no welfare state, old people get looked after by the family, right? They have to take them into the home. Someone who has an addiction problem or whatever, or, they're not just kind of like, okay, well, the government will deal with you, go into a government system, a government program. It's like, well, no, they're taken into the house. They're dealt with by the family. There might be many people who like, they would otherwise be on the street if there was a welfare system, because people just say, okay, well, I'm not responsible for this person, even if it might be my own like family or whatever. I actually think that the fundamental nature of people, and we have to accept this, because as much as we try to abstract away all these ideas of like collectivism and stuff, I think that when it comes down to it, the human instinct is you look after yourself and your family and the people close to you that you actually love and care about. And anything outside of that, you will try to wriggle out of, right? Everyone, no matter how, virtuous you are, like everyone tries to wriggle out of taxes, right? Like, everyone does this, whether you're a company, whether you're self-employed or whatever. You get your tax thing and you're like, what can I put down as an expense to try and wriggle out of this taxation? Now, you don't do that for your friends and family. Like when your friends and family come to you and need help, you don't say, okay, well, what can I wriggle out of here? You say, okay, well, I love and care for this person. I want to help them out. That's the natural human condition. And all of this state apparatus has tried to basically invert like the natural state of human nature. And also, I don't think it's selfish to say this stuff. Like this is just accepting how it should be. And, I think that actually it's the opposite. People should be taking more personal responsibility for themselves and the people around them. And, I think that with the new world that we're going into, where there is a kind of, in my opinion, like a renaissance of people caring about stuff like self-sovereignty and self-sustainability, etc. I hope that one of those things is actually saying, you know what, like let's do more for the community around me. Let's actually do that. Let's take that into my personal responsibility. Now that the state has, is out of that business because they're broke or bankrupt or, doing their own thing, whatever they're doing. How can I do better for my community and improve things? And I hope that people will start asking those questions again, like we once did and like they still do in many societies around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be a hard lesson for some people to learn, unfortunately, because we're so used to, especially in a rich country like the US, where it's like, it's just a given that there's all this money flowing out there. I mean, when the COVID money started coming out, I was like, no, this is not going to end well. When they started sending checks to people, I just knew, no matter what, even if it was just the loans at the low rates and stuff, I just knew that this was going to end badly. And sure enough, here we are like 2 years later, and it's not looking too good. So, so I think whenever you take that incentive away, and you start giving people things like that, it just totally doesn't work. And they have natural incentive, like you said, it's it has to be voluntarism. It has to be voluntarily helping people. That's the way to go. Forcing people to help other people. Yeah, it's never gonna work. And you're right. I think the next 10 years are going to be very interesting to see how things shape up. I like to be an optimist and say that, there are going to be ways, like the freedom in an unfree world. And there are always ways to stay free and to build freedom. And, but that doesn't mean that, there aren't a lot of problems coming down, in the next few years.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, man, tell me about your podcast, the Freedom Lovin podcast. I've been listening to, you got some great interviews on there and stuff like that. And, I've learned a little bit about yourself as well through it. So tell me about kind of getting that started and, what your kind of objectives are in doing it.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. I started it as freedomlovin.com started as a blog when I was traveling, and I was actually in Southeast Asia, and I was just doing blog posts and videos and stuff like that, and didn't really have much of a plan with it other than just for, send it to my parents and like a couple friends that wanted to see what I was doing. And then I got back, and after a while I was like, I kind of want to do a podcast. And so I started a podcast, and I didn't really, the only plan was to talk about freedom and to talk about like things like this, like things that I enjoy talking about. So I just had friends on. The first few episodes are just friends of mine that we share a lot of the same philosophy. And then I started getting into like, kind of interviewing entrepreneurs and other people and doing some solo shows. And, I really enjoyed it for a while. And then I took some time off, lost most of my audience, and then kind of made a comeback. And now I rebranded it this year. Wait, was it this year? Yeah. This year I rebranded it, and it's got a little bit different feel. I wanted to kind of extract information from some books and do like somewhat sort of like book summaries, but I call them freedom reads. And so I did a few episodes on different books I think are really valuable. And then, and now I'm getting back to sort of having conversations with people. That's what I enjoy. I enjoy talking. It's kind of like, when you listen to Joe Rogan, he's got a lot of money, obviously, and he can do whatever he wants. And he's like, I just want to talk to people and have a good time and, have conversations. And that's kind of where I'm at, is like, I don't have a goal. I don't really have an end point to it. I just think that at some point I will probably do more with it, but I have no idea what that is yet. I have a business that I run so this is kind of Freedom Lovin is kind of a side thing because, I think that the combination of the philosophy, the freedom philosophy and entrepreneurship are what, is sort of that's kind of what I'm about and how I see the world moving forward. So I like to do both of those things, but yeah, that's the podcast. Freedom Lovin. It's a great time. And I met a lot of really cool and interesting people through it. And that's what I want to keep doing.
Yeah, man, I totally feel that as well. Yeah. Like, when I started the podcast, I didn't really kind of think exactly where it was going to go. I could just sense that there was all these cool people I was communicating with online. And I was like, I want to talk to these people. These people I want to have conversations with and talk about the world and all the rest of it. And it's a really fulfilling experience. It's not necessarily for everyone, but like, I think it is, if you're one of those people who kind of like, gets kicks from that, then it's great. I think I heard you say in one of your episodes that you were an introvert as well. Did I mistake that, or did you? Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask. So, like, based upon you saying you're introvert, like, do you find that the podcast is a way also of you kind of expressing yourself in a way that maybe is kind of like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, for instance, as an introvert? Is that kind of also one of your one of the things that you've got out of it?
I actually have never thought of that. That's an interesting point. It could be one of the things. I feel like being an introvert, one-on-one is not a problem. I mean, if it's a one-on-one conversation, no problem. It's when I go to a party and I talk to 15 people, and at the end of that time, I'm just exhausted and I don't want to talk to anybody for a while. And so it was my namorada, my girlfriend.
Nice. Say hi.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a great topic because I think I thought I was weird for most of my life. And then I read a book called The Introvert Advantage at some point. And that book, like, I just had all these realizations. I was like, oh, I'm not that weird. Like, I just thought I was weird because I was always the quiet kid in school. And I just thought I was just completely different from most people. And especially in the US, it's a very extroverted country where it's like everyone wants to be like, look at me and, like what I'm doing. And so it was sort of a difficult thing to grow up as an introvert. But then once you realize that there are advantages to it, it's amazing. It's like, it turned over a whole new leaf for me. And then, but there are struggles too. I mean, like Brazil, the US is an extroverted country. Brazil is like that times 10, it's like everybody's always talking. It's like you can't leave. I can't walk out of my apartment here and not have somebody saying hello to me, bom dia, and it's like, it takes me out of my head, which is good. That's always a good thing. But yeah, the podcast thing, I think when I was young, I used to want to be like a radio disc jockey. Like I thought that would be fun to be on the radio, and I never did it. And then when I had the opportunity to do a podcast, it was like, yeah, that's kind of the same thing. Only it's more on my schedule, and I can kind of guide it more than having to conform to whatever radio station. So
cool. How long have you been doing it now, the podcast?
Well, I started in 2013, but it's been like there have been years when I didn't do it at all. Yeah. I even did a podcast before that, but yeah, it's been like an off and on thing where I get really into it for a while and then I kind of back off and I go, yeah, I got other things to do. But yeah, it's been quite a journey.
Cool. But yeah, no, it's awesome. That you're obviously consider yourself an introvert and stuff, but you obviously live a life, doing stuff like podcasting and living in different countries and stuff, which, that's all stuff that I imagine is quite difficult, for an introvert. So, like huge credit to you for kind of doing all that stuff. Cause I imagine that, it's quite a big step to take. I think that maybe my natural disposition is extroverted, but I don't know. It's a weird one, but yeah, I imagine that doing, living this kind of life that you're living, digital nomadism, living in different places, like doing that as an introvert, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a scale. I mean, obviously everybody's, somewhere on the scale of like,
right.
Computer programmer sitting, living in the basement, would be the extreme introvert. And then, like constantly being around people all day long, like there's a balance. And I had a group of friends once, and we were talking about this, we had this topic and I said, yeah, I'm definitely an introvert. I'm definitely on that side. And one of the friends was like, no, you're not. That doesn't make any sense at all. You're always wanting to do things and go out. And, I'm like, yeah, that's true. I'm definitely like on the social end of the introversion scale, but, it doesn't mean that you're always alone and you can't talk to people and stuff like that. It's there are differences.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about it that way, because actually when you were just saying there about, like going to parties with loads and loads of people, I think that's probably true of me as well. Like I love being around people. I don't really like being on my own. Like being on my own that sucks, but I like being around people. But there's kind of like a kind of golden number there somewhere, maybe around like, yeah, I don't know, 4 to 5 people. That's, I'm in my element there, but actually you're right. Like as it gets kind of more and more, it does become kind of much more exhausting. So yeah, maybe there's a kind of sweet spot for different people. Some people that's sitting on their own reading. That's not me personally, but it's also like, massive like crowds, like really big crowds, like big parties and stuff. Yeah, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily like my sweet spot either.
Yeah.
You mentioned about books. You got any book recommendations for us?
Well, I think did we talk about the How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, that's kind of how. So a guy named Harry Brown, he was actually the Libertarian Party candidate for president in 1996 and 2000, and he would go on TV back then, and that was when I was first kind of becoming aware of like what my political beliefs were. And he ran for president, but before that, in 1973, he wrote a book called How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World, and it was all about how to be free in your life despite the things that are going on around you, despite taxation, despite whatever the government's doing, and all the different ways. And it's a very deep book. I mean, it's a really interesting read. And especially because you're kind of a digital nomad traveling and stuff, I would recommend it because it sort of gives you that sort of foundation of, well, how can I, in this situation, how can I be the most free? What is the thing? And it could be friendships, it could be romantic relationships, it could be money situations, anything. And it really opened me up when I read that book. And then he actually talks about in the book, don't get involved in political like groups that are trying to change political things, because most of the time they just never work and you just waste a lot of time. And that really hit home for me, because I was doing the Ron Paul thing, and it was right after that I read this book and I was like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. So that for me, that based on our conversation today, I think any of your listeners would love that book. It's hard to find the hard copy book version, but it's easy to find the PDF online.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Thanks for the suggestion. So yeah, man, this has been awesome. I'm really glad that we've got to know each other, and like I appreciate you inviting me on your pod, and I'm glad that we kind of did this little podcast exchange. So yeah, definitely check out the Freedom Lovin podcast. I did a recent episode on there, but there's loads of like great conversations on there as well. So yeah, people should definitely check out the pod. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we finish up?
Oh, just I wanted to mention that I wrote a book and I released it this summer. It's called. Sorry. Yeah, no worries. It's called The Rebel's Guide to Freedom, and it's kind of it started when in the middle of COVID when everything seemed kind of hopeless, and what I kind of like dug in and was trying to figure out is like why aren't people rebelling against what is going on? It's like the vast majority of people just went along with every single step of the way. And it was really bothering me. And so I wrote this book with the idea that we all do have a rebel part, but it gets squashed all along the way in childhood and school and with media and all this stuff. And how can we channel that to allow us to build more freedom in our own life? Just what we're talking about in this podcast. How can we use that rebel part, but not to go against the government, not to try to change the system, but to build ourselves up in our own lives and in all the different areas that you can think of, money and relationships and your job or career and all these things. So I get into all that and I talk about, how we can best use this rebel part in building a better world and starting with ourselves.
Nice, man. I love the fact that you're kind of you're straddling this line, it seems, between almost like kind of self-improvement and like libertarianism and freedom philosophy and stuff. I love that you're kind of like in between those two zones because quite a lot of like I guess the freedom philosophy stuff, it can get a bit like I guess when you're looking at some of like Austrian economics and this kind of stuff and reading Rothbard, it can be kind of heavy. But like this kind of stuff that you're talking about is very much on an individual level of like what can you do? And I'm sure that people can kind of become like much more self-actualized, like we were talking about, through doing stuff in their own life. So I love that it applies directly to that. So with the book, is that your first time writing?
I wrote a book on swimming before. I was a competitive swimmer, and I actually wrote a book on swimming before that. But really, this was my first, like, just from scratch, just coming up with ideas and putting a book together.
Great. How did you find that process?
It took me a lot longer than I ever thought. I started in August of 2020, and I released the book in August of 2022. And it was a lot of work, a lot more work than I ever imagined. But overall, I wasn't in a hurry. I didn't have a deadline in my head. I just thought for some reason that I could knock it out in 6 months, but that didn't happen. But no, it was good. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about writing. I learned a lot about coming up with ideas, and then now it's been since then. I've just kind of put that project not really on hold, but just sort of on the side while I work on my business. But yeah, I don't think it's for everybody. I don't think everybody needs to write a book. I mean, it's quite a process. I did hire a book coach, and I think that was really helpful to organize my thoughts and everything. So yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah. I hope that at some point we get to meet in person. If you ever come in by Mexico, then let me know. I also want to come to Brazil at some point because you're the second person I know over there as well. I think I mentioned on your podcast, a guy called Gareth Martin. He's over there as well in Brazil. Yeah, I listened to that show. Yeah, I was curious about that. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So I'll try and make it there sometime. But if not, and you end up in Mexico, then it'd be great to hang out. I'll be there in April. So Mexico City, I have a conference. So definitely, and who knows, I might end up going to the beach after. Oh, nice. Okay, what's the conference? Yeah, it's called the Dynamite Circle. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's an entrepreneur group. It's a lot of digital nomads are in it, and a lot of people with online businesses. And they do 2 conferences a year. Usually, one is in Thailand in Bangkok, and the other one is in Austin. And now they since COVID and Thailand shut down, they just were doing Mexico City. But now they just did one in October, and now they're going to do one in Mexico City in April. Nice. Yeah. Well, if you do make it out to the coast, I don't know whether I'll go to Mexico City at some point. I kind of like going there less and less. I do like it though. It's a great city. I don't know if you've been there. Yeah. If you've been there before, but it's really awesome. As far as big cities go, it's a really good one. But if you make it out to the coast or whatever, then that'd be awesome. Yeah, it'd be great to hang. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Johnny, appreciate you having me on. It's been a blast chatting with you. Yeah, likewise. All right, take it easy, dude. All right, cheers.